So we're going to start with simplifying rational expressions. The first thing to do is look for your greatest common factor, your GCF, in both the numerator and the denominator. And the denominator is not anything, but in this numerator, we have a 2, right? I can divide both of these by 2, and I'll get nice even numbers. So 2r divided by 2 is just going to leave me with r minus, and then 4 divided by 2 is 2. And that leaves me with r minus 2. And now I can actually go ahead and simplify, right, because these are dividing. So I can actually cancel out my r minus 2's on both of them. And that just leaves me with 2. And that's my final answer. The second one. So the second one is the same thing. So there's no greatest common factor in the numerator, but there is a greatest common factor in the denominator, which is 10. And that gives me a minus 1. Now in this case, I can actually simplify, right? So the nice thing that, since this is multiplication, I can do a separate division rather than have to cancel out everything. So I can look for my greatest common factor between 10 and 45. So 45 is what? 1 times 45, 5 times 9, 10 is 1 times 10, 2 times 5. So both of them have that 5. So I'm actually going to end up dividing both of these by 5. And when I do that, 45 divided by 5 is, like we said, 9. 10 divided by 5 is 2. And I leave that a minus 1. And that's the simplifying of that first one. Now for this last one, what I need to do is I need to factor this denominator, right? If I'm not factoring the denominator, I don't actually know if there's anything I can cancel out. So I'm going to do my v squared minus 10v plus 25. And you can factor however is easiest for you. I do it the old-fashioned way. Take the leading coefficient, which in this case is 1, multiply it by the last, which is 25. I take all my factors of 25, figure out what combines to that middle number, right? And I always bring down my signs. So, and I know it's going to be 5 and 5, so minus 5b. Now a negative times a positive is a negative. So I'm going to just write that in a different color. Multiply. And that's going to give me the negative, and then it's another 5b plus 25. Now I separate both halves. I find the greatest common factor between b squared and 5b, which is just b minus 5. Between 5v and 25, the greatest common factor is 5. Now remember, I just bring down that negative. And that's going to give me v plus 5. So when I factor v squared minus 10v plus 25, it's going to give me v minus 5 and v. Actually, it will be both. Because if I'm factoring out a negative 5, I need a negative 5 on the inside in order to get a positive 25. So it's actually both v minus 5. Now when I write that, there's two ways you can write it, depending on how your, the platform you're using is asking for the answer. You can see it as that, or is v minus 5 over v minus 5 squared. Both of these are the same. This one is a little bit easier because we can actually continue factoring. We can actually factor out a v minus 5. And that would just give me, so my final answer is 1 over v minus 5. It's the same thing if I were to factor out here, right? This would really be a 1, which would cancel, and that 2 would then become a 1. And it would still be the same thing. Okay? Now I'm going to move on to this last one. So this last one is a little bit of both. we're going to need to factor out the numerator and factor the denominator. So in the numerator, before I do the factoring, I can actually take out an x from each, right? Every single term in the numerator has an x, which is going to leave me with an x squared minus x minus 42. And then I'm going to focus, with a different color, I'm going to focus on this inside part and go ahead and factor that as well. And that's going to be the same thing. So again, if you know the shortcut, it will be, they're both going to have an x. Then it will be the same, the minus, I bring down the first one, minus and a minus is a positive. And then the two factors that add up to 42 should be, let me check them out, it should be 4 and 7. I mean 6 and 7. Yeah, 6 times 7. If I'm looking for a negative, my larger number is going to be with the negative. So that's the shortcut way. If you know the shortcut way, you could do the shortcut way. To me, I prefer the long way, especially for problems like the one we have in the denominator, where we have a, and I'm actually going to write it already, x minus 7, and x plus 6. So if I have this 2x squared minus 20x plus 42, you can do the long way. If you want to do the shortcut, the greatest common factor in this entire problem is actually 2. So I can separate a 2 immediately, right? And that's going to give me x squared minus 20 divided by 2 is going to be 10. And 42 divided by 2 is 21. Okay. And now I can do the shortcut if I want to do the shortcut here, which I just might. So 21, there's only 1 times 21 and 7 times 3. So I know that 7 is going to be first, it's going to be, it doesn't matter, both of these are negatives. So this is x minus 7 and x minus 3. Now once again, I'm going to check for any of the matching that's on the top and the bottom, which I have my x minus 7s, leaving my final answer as x plus 6 over 2x minus 3. Okay, if your platform is asking you for the factored form, you would leave it just like that. Okay, because that's the basic factoring. Now, moving on, we're going to go ahead and get started on operations with rational expressions. So in this first problem, right, it's just like doing any kind of addition or subtraction with fractions. My denominators are the same, so I'm really only going to focus on my numerators. So I have u plus 5v minus, I'm going to put this u minus 6v in parentheses, and my denominator is still going to be that. Now, I put the parentheses because sometimes it's easy to forget that there's really a 1 here and I need to distribute the negative. So it's really u plus 5v minus u minus, or actually plus 6v over 8v squared u squared. So now I can see u minus u, that's going to cancel out. And 5v plus 6v is actually going to be 11v over 8v squared u squared. Now the second one, they do have two different denominators. So what we have to do is we have to multiply, right? To get the common denominator, the least common denominator, is we need to multiply that 7v minus 6 and 3v squared so that they have the same thing. So if I'm looking at 3v minus 6, I mean 7v minus 6, the one I'm missing is 3v squared. If I'm looking at 3v squared, this part I'm missing is 7v minus 6. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing on both sides. right? Now, I don't want to factor the denominator. Why? Because if it's asking me for factored form, that's how I want to leave it. Now, I need to do 8 times 3, which will be 24. 24v squared plus, and now I'm distributing my 4, so 4 times 7 is 28v, and 4 times negative 6 is going to be negative 24. Okay, so now I want to go ahead and simplify this or factor it out even more. And how I'm going to do that is I'm going to focus on this 24v squared plus 28v minus 24. Now all of these do have a greatest common factor, and that's actually 4, right? So if I want to divide all these by 4 to get some smaller, more manageable numbers, I take my 4 out. 24 divided by 4 is, we already said it was 6, so 6v squared plus 7v minus 6. Now I'm going to go ahead and, like I said, multiply my 6 times 6, which is 36. I'm going to write down the factors of 36. 1 times 36. 2 times, I believe it is 18. And this will be also by 3, which is 12. And remember, I'm looking for, so I'm going to just write this out, 6v squared plus something v minus something v minus 6. So I'm looking for something, so if I do 12 minus 3, that gives me 9, so I'm not there yet. 36 divided by 4 will be 9. And 9 minus 4 gives me 5. So actually, when I try to simplify this, I can't go past this simplification. So that leaves my answers. You can even leave it as that, or as the 6v squared plus 7v minus 6. So if there's nothing else you can factor, then that's just your final answer. Nothing else you can do there. Now for multiplying or dividing. So in this first example, right, what you want to do is you want to simplify, but you only simplify across, and it has to be the full x plus 3. So, as I just said, we can simplify these x plus 3's and cancel them out. Then when I can go ahead and do my regular multiplication, so this is really a 1 that's left over, which is going to give me 3x minus 6 over 4, and actually times 3, which I can actually also eliminate my 3's, right? And that would give me an x minus 6 over 4. So if I had left it as 3x minus 6, and let's say I did my multiplication, that would have given me 12. Well, I can still divide both of these by the greatest common factor, which is 3. So I would still end up with x minus 6, 4. You have to remember that if it's asking for the factored form, you have to factor basically until you can't factor anymore. And this is the last example. This is to divide. So when it comes to the dividing, always remember the way I learned it was copy, change, flip. So let me write it in: copy, change, and flip. So this is a fraction over a fraction. So I always copy my numerator, which is 1, 5p squared. I change my sign. So remember that fractions are really just a division. So if it's division, I change it to multiplication, which is its opposite. And then I flip the denominator. But now to the denominator, right, would be 5p3 minus 35p squared. The denominator is not fully factored, meaning I don't want to do the multiplication just yet, because then I'm going to have to factor through it all afterwards, and we can do that, but I think it's a little bit easier to do it at the beginning. So my greatest common factor in the numerator is actually what? I can factor out of 5, I can factor out of p, and at most I can factor out 2 p's actually, which leaves me just a p minus 7. And in this bottom one, right, I can factor out a 9. That gives me p minus, and that's going to be 4. Okay, so now I really have 5p squared times 5p squared p minus 7. And then that's going to be 9p minus 4. So again, I can cancel out my p squared, 5p squared, and that's going to leave me with p minus 7 over 9p minus 4. Now, again, you want to factor that, even though there was nothing that could cancel out with that 9p minus 36, you want to factor it out anyway, because if you don't, you are not leaving it in factored form and you might get it counted wrong. Okay, so I'm going to end this video that was simplifying rational expressions, adding and subtracting.